My name is Kylie Boller. I am a student here at Lewis and Clark State College, and today we're on the beautiful campus with author Patricia Rae. We're going to talk a little bit about her books, Mark of the Fairy, and her new one releasing in October of Lace and Lions. Thank you for being here. We just have some questions for you about your book, your lifestyle, what brought you to be an author,
Okay.
and kind of the journey that you've taken to get here.
Well, thank you for wanting to know a little bit more
Yes.
about me.
I think what most people want to know is what inspired your books?
Well, since I was a child, I've always been a storyteller. And a storyteller first, before a writer, actually. So, and my love of books has always kind of leaned toward the fantasy side.
Mm-hmm.
So just reading a lot of really great books as I was growing up kept me focused on my storytelling and what I wanted to do and how I wanted to express myself creatively, because I've always been a creative soul, I guess. So when I read the books by Diana Gabaldon, the Outlander series, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. Mm-hmm. It goes into the same time period in the Highlands of Scotland in the mid-1700s, and I fell in love with that because I have Scottish roots. So between that and my love for fairies that I've had since I was a child and never grew out of, that's what inspired this story to be written.
Okay. How much research did you need for each book?
A ton for the first 3 books, especially because they're all in a real place in history, mm-hmm. in Scotland. So it was really important that I had my facts straight, because this is for adults.
Right.
It's not a child's fairy tale story. So I didn't want somebody picking up and saying, hey, that's not right. They didn't do that time period. So doing the research was extremely important. Yeah. Understanding the history, knowing what the religion was like, what the currency was like, what was the industry like, what did the people wear, what did they eat, right. How did they travel, how long did it take to get from here to there on horseback. You know, all that was a ton of research.
Yeah.
When I got into book 4, I really could let my imagination run wild because we were in a world nobody's been in but me. So it was more just following some of the other fantasy authors and looking at what other people were doing.
Right.
So
I love that. How important was professional editing to your book's development?
Oh my gosh, absolutely crucial. If anybody was ever thinking about wanting to publish something they have written, I would say do not do it without taking it in front of a professional editor first. Mm-hmm. And I have 2 professional editors and a proofreader who've looked over all my books more times than I would like to admit. Book 1 went through over 20 revisions before that any of us felt like it was ready to go. Because I had to learn how to be a writer. It didn't come naturally for me.
Right.
In the words of Ernest Hemingway, everybody has to learn how to write. Let them believe you were born that way. So I was always a storyteller, and I knew that, but learning how to write was crucial, and my editors walked me down that path.
Right.
So very important.
What is your writing process like, and are you more of a plotter or a pantser?
You know what that means?
I don't. There was some hesitation there.
Right, I know. That's why I thought, she doesn't sound like she understands that question very well. Okay, obviously, a plotter is someone who outlines before they even start. And a really good outline should be written before you actually start writing your first draft. You want to know the not the chapters, but the acts. And every good story has 3 acts. First act, middle act, and the third act. Okay. And then knowing what's happening in each one of those acts is also important. So again, the story came to me first. So putting it into an outline is important, writing out blueprints about what's going to happen in what scene. But the characters can take over and lead you in a whole different direction that you weren't expecting. So in that case, I do both. I plot it out, but I listen to the characters and I let them take me where they know this story goes.
Right. Okay. Now I understand a little more.
Yeah.
Okay. Is the best way to improve writing skills?
I think the best way is to read a lot.
Right.
I love to quote authors that I admire, and Stephen King said that if you want to be a good reader, want to be a good writer, you need to read a lot. And he's true. And that's a very true statement. The only way you can learn how to write is to read other people's work.
Right.
Find out what works for you, and then follow those mechanics and that sentence structure and that flow, and take classes, tons of classes, workshops, writing classes, buy craft books, listen to other people, join writers' groups. Anything where you can learn to step outside yourself and realize that this is a product. It's not me. It's not a piece of my soul.
Right.
This is now a product, and I want to improve it.
Okay.
So that's kind of what I would suggest.
Yeah. Does writing energize or exhaust you, or both?
Most of the time, it energizes me. When I'm actually just writing and I'm in the groove, I feel like this energy starting to grow inside, especially if it's a really good scene and it's just flowing out. You know, it's very energizing when I get that on the screen, and I'm like, wow, that was really awesome. I'm so good at this.
I'm so good at this.
And then they come back the next day and go, who wrote this crap? But so that part's really fun. The exhausting part is when the editor's like, you have to rewrite this part. You need to go back and create this scene. Or this completely has to be rewritten because it doesn't flow well. That part's exhausting because, well, writing is a constant work in progress.
Right.
Yeah.
Are there any books or authors that inspired you to become a writer?
Yes. Well, from my earliest childhood, the ones I loved the most were J.R.R. Tolkien. Hobbit was one of my favorites. He's the one who got me started in fantasy, loving fantasy in the first place. But there's also Diana Gabaldon. I think I already mentioned to her because she opened up this world for me. Juliette Marillier, she also takes fairy tales and she rewrites them for adults. Mm-hmm. And she's written some beautiful stuff. Terry Goodkind, he's a fantasy writer. So you may not have heard of any of these authors, but they inspire me. And the other ones that inspire me are A.L. Milne and Shel Silverstein, the authors of Winnie the Pooh and Where the Sidewalk Ends. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you're familiar with any of those, but they're both in kind of the fantasy world, Dr. Seuss, all of those. Yeah, those are the authors who have inspired me.
Yeah, those are a lot of good ones. Okay, what books did you grow up reading?
Well,
kind of follows that.
It kind of follows that. But I also read things that weren't just fantasy. Like I read Little Women. I loved that story. I wasn't really into the Nancy Drew mysteries books so much because it wasn't magical enough for me.
Right.
But again, Winnie the Pooh, Shel Silverstein's those books, Dr. Seuss, Little Women. You ever heard of Jonathan Livingston Seagull?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
And The Little Prince. They're both stories that I read as a child about young people who were loners. And I felt like I could relate to them. So I really connected with those stories.
Yeah. What is the most valued piece of advice that you've been given about writing?
That's a good question. Just write a lot. Just write a lot and take classes and join writers' groups, because you're not going to gain in your confidence unless you feel like you're learning something.
Yeah, growing.
The more I have learned about the fact that I can write, my confidence grows little bits. It took me a long time to get there, but take classes, buy craft books, read a lot.
Yeah.
And join some writers groups so you can get some feedback.
Yeah, that's important. Okay. Have your family and friends been supportive in your writing, and who is your biggest supporter?
Okay, so I would say to anyone who thinks that they can write a book and publish it, don't go looking for your family to be your greatest fans or supporters, because I've been writing this story for, no lie, over 20 years, probably as long or longer than either one of you have been alive. But so every time the family goes, how's it going? What you doing? I'm writing. Oh, okay. She's always writing. When are you going to publish those books? Someday. So, and that was a rare occasion they would even ask. So my family has not been the greatest supporter until I said, okay, guess what? I'm ready to publish. And they go, wow, 15, 20 years later, you're really going to go through with this? And then they kind of jumped on board. And my husband got involved. Up to that point, he didn't really want anything to do with it. He was a silent supporter in the background. So probably just a few close friends and some writers are going to be your greatest supporter in the beginning.
Okay. What about your life changed when you started that step in your career as an author?
Oh, I had to grow up. I thought I was an adult. Like I said, I started my own business. Then a couple of years later, I started another business. I was a Pilates instructor. I had my own fitness studio for a number of years. I thought I was an adult. But when I started really deciding I want to put my story out into the world, oh my God. My little girl came running out of the closet, and she's afraid of everything. So learning how to talk her down, to face my fears, and still keep the bitchy business Patty back over here to not make it worse, has been a huge challenge.
Right.
It's kind of been a balancing act.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
So really facing my fears to get out there and doing the social media, marketing, it's not been my forte up until this point.
Yeah.
So embracing that mindset has probably been one of the biggest changes I've had to face.
Yeah. Significant way that your first book has changed since its first draft.
Oh, immensely. That first book, I started writing 20 years ago, didn't know how to write, actually presented it to a couple of family members early when it was just a manuscript, and they handed it back to me and said, I can't read this. It's such a mess. I cannot read this. And it was really hard to get over that little bit of a confidence, no confidence, I guess, to reach out to a professional editor and say, I wrote this wonderful story, but it's like crap on the paper.
Right.
Can you please make it better? So she got a hold of it, and she did her thing. And again, 20 plus revisions before Sarah, my developmental editor, John, my copy editor, Tom, my proofreader, before it was, okay, I think it's as good as we're going to get it, so let's go.
Right,
so
right.
A lot.
At what point do you think that someone should call themselves a writer?
I'm not sure I do yet. Yes, I have 3 published books. I have another one coming out this October. I've been very, very blessed that I've gotten some wonderful reviews. So, I guess you could say whenever someone feels like they are ready to say, I'm a writer.
Right.
It does add some confidence to your goals and your own self-esteem if you can announce that. I'm a writer.
Yeah.
But I've been a storyteller my whole life, and so I've always identified as a storyteller first.
Right.
So, but I can say I'm a writer now, I think.
I would agree.
I can go there.
How long have you been writing, or when did it start, putting your ideas on paper?
Young. Okay. Again, no confidence, didn't know how to write and share with anybody.
Right.
But I had, this file of papers, poetry, essays. I was probably since middle school, high school is when I really started getting into expressing myself, because I felt writing was the best way to express my feelings.
Right.
So, yeah, at a pretty early age. And it wasn't until I was in high school and I took a class called Creative Writing, and the teacher had us interpret the words of the Beatles album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Heart Club Band. Now, you girls probably haven't heard of it, but it was a famous album that came out in the 70s, and it's full of metaphors, symbolism, and she had us break all these lyrics down, and that's when I realized, wow, the English word can have more than one meaning.
Yeah.
It can say something totally different, and that's when I fell in love with writing at that
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah. Be a character in one of your favorite books. Who would it be?
I would want to be, I think, Margaret. And Margaret's throughout the first 3 books. She is not the main character, but she is the main supportive character.
Mm-hmm.
She's the one that, she's the rock. She's there for everyone. She's solid. When everybody else is falling apart, it's Margaret who picks the pieces up.
Mm-hmm.
She's nurturing. Nobody expects a whole lot out of her.
Right.
Other than just be there for me. And she just is a strong, independent businesswoman, and she doesn't take a lot of guff off anybody, and she doesn't think a man should tell her what to do.
I love that.
You know? But she is very, very protective of the main character, Isabel, and would give her life for her.
Mm-hmm.
So the bond that these 2 women have is very special,
Yeah.
and makes me. She just came onto the page like, gangbusters or whatever that word is. But yeah, she made a really strong appearance.
Yeah.
I like her, and I'd like to be her. She's got confidence.
You ever traveled as research for your books?
Oh, absolutely. Because I am writing a story, I've written a story that takes place in Scotland, granted 200 plus years ago. I wanted to make sure that I had at least my geography facts correct, that the landscape, the way that the land was laid out, where the island was that, they traveled to. So in 2019, just before the pandemic closed everything down in September, I convinced my editor, Sarah, to go with me.
Yeah.
So we took a trip to Scotland and went to every city that my characters had traveled to. Mm-hmm. We even went all the way to the northern point of the mainland and took a ferry over to the Orkney Island and stayed in the very same city that my characters were in, and went to the Ring of Brogar and saw the standing stones of Stenness and all those old ruins, and it was fabulous. So yes, awesome. It was necessary. I learned a few things that I didn't have quite right. So that was really good.
Yeah.
So it was definitely worth the trip.
Yeah. If you could meet your characters, what would you say to them?
I would say thank you. Thank you for trusting me with your story.
Yeah.
Because again, this story was given to me.
Yeah.
And they chose me to write it. It's not about me, it's about sharing the story. So I would say to them, thank you. Thank you for never giving up. Thank you for showing up in my shower and saying, write this scene. Because, when you have a Scottish warrior show up in your shower and start giving you orders, you kind of pay attention. So it's like, got it. I'll write that. Thank you.
Got it.
So yes, I would just say thank you for trusting me to write your story.
I love that. How did you come up with the title for your books?
Meditation and inspiration. I wrote these 2 books before I titled them. Mm-hmm. And then once I had them all down and I kind of had an idea of what the series was going to be called. It was Mark of the Fairy, because obviously there's a mark on the front of these books that's similar because it's on one of the characters. So actually knowing what I was going to title each individual book came through just kind of listening to my spirit guides. What should it be called?
Right.
They gave me this story.
Yeah.
Give me the title.
Yeah.
Too.
Like, come on.
Yeah. So through a little bit of inspiration and meditation, they just came to me. And nobody said, I don't like that name, you should change it. So I've gone with it. And I think it works. Yeah. I think they all work.
All right. What advice would you give to a writer working on their first book?
Don't give up too soon. Just let it flow. Whatever is coming out on the end of your fingertips, on your keyboard, on a piece of paper, just let it go. Let it flow. Let it come. Mm-hmm. Yes, it may feel like it's just a bunch of garbage right now, but you have a story to tell. Mm-hmm. Everybody who wants to write has a story to tell, whether it's a journalism, whether it's obituaries, whatever you write, whether it's fantasy books or fiction books. If you feel the longing to write, There's a reason for that.
Yeah.
So just let it all go. Take the classes, learn, join groups that are supportive of other writers.
Yeah.
And I just think that joining some, I don't know how many people are using Facebook anymore, but I have a couple of Facebook groups I belong to that are supportive of writers. And
Yeah.
I have gotten I've received some of the best advice from these other writers who are just like me, struggling to try to figure out, how do I do this?
Yeah.
And I think that's what you need. You need a network. You need a supportive network. And just don't give up. Because if it's meant to share this story, then it will. If you just want to write it for yourself, then just write it for yourself.
Yeah.
Just write. So that's what I would say.
Okay. What book or books are you currently reading?
I'm currently reading Fire and Hemlock by Diana Wynne Jones, which is a fantasy, of course. And I just finished reading a really great book called Once and Future Witches by Alex Harrow. And, I'm sorry, I am a fantasy lover, and that's what I read. So that was good. But I also read one that's not a fantasy. It's called, really good, just recently, Life of Job by Jonathan Troper. And it's not a fantasy. It's about a man who goes back to his hometown and writes his life story, and it's hilarious. And it had me laughing through the whole thing. So anyway, I try to read a little bit of everything, but because of the genre I write in and what I want to write in, it's usually fantasy. And I want to add something else. If you're going to write something, write what you love. There's a lot of writers out there who think, I want to write all genres. I want to write romance. I want to write thrillers. I want to write children's books, or westerns, or whatever. No. I would say if you're just starting out, pick one. Be true to it. Pick a pen name. And I know there's a lot of writers out there who try to write in different genres, and they pick different pen names for each one because they don't want these people who read children's books to know they write erotica. Right. So confusing, I would think. But if you can pull it off, great. I wouldn't suggest it. I would just find the genre that you love, that you feel comfortable writing about.
Stick with it.
Stick with it. Yeah, and stick with it.
I love it.
So yeah.
All right.
So I think that's good.
That
I really
might be
appreciate
all my questions.
Yeah, I appreciate you wanting to know, and thanks for coming all the way down here.
Yeah, thank you for joining me.
Me too. I'm glad we did.